Chapter 7 begins with a miracle where Jesus heals at a distance. He does not even need to be there, let alone perform any rite, with, for example, spitting or making paste with clay, any questions or commands. This type of miracle is rare, but it demonstrates Jesus' incredible power. The centurion is a Gentile and obviously a deep admirer of the Jews, so much so that he built this local synagogue. For this reason, the elders are glad to intercede for him. They know the sincerity of his admiration. But also for this reason, the centurion feels unworthy to approach this Jewish prophet, and so must send intercessors who are more appropriate. Although the request is initially for Jesus to come and heal the slave, the centurion must have begun to feel much more conscious about what he had asked to do, now that he had heard it was actually happening. For some unknown reason, which Jesus will identify as his great faith, this centurion has no doubt whatsoever that Jesus' presence is actually unnecessary, and that a mere word or even thought would be enough to heal his slave. His reasoning is based on his own experiences in the Roman army, but his logic still does not cover the enormous leap his confidence so easily makes in Jesus. No wonder Jesus is amazed. Luke does not even record any word about the healing or assurance that it will be done. It simply is. Another rare miracle type follows, which is a raising from the dead. There is Jairus' daughter in Matthew, Mark and Luke, and in John there is Lazarus, and in Acts there are two more, Tabitha and Eutychus. This story in Luke occurs only here. The miracle Jesus performs is for the mother for whom he feels compassion. Jesus ignores the corpse impurity involved, which was the strongest kind of impurity. He touches the bier to stop it, but it is his authoritative word of command which raises the young man. The reaction of the crowd is significant and partly echoes the sentiments found in the songs of the infancy narrative about God having mercy on his people. After this, John the Baptist's question comes as a surprise, but what Jesus has to say in response fits well with the preceding miracles of healing and restoration. Jesus obviously confused many people. He was neither a crushing legalist enforcing the strictest version of Torah possible, but nor as eschatological judge was he destroying Israel's enemies from without and within. Perhaps John was unsure about the seeming delay in judgment, or perhaps it was the nature of Jesus' ministry itself. Jesus' response to John is also surprising. He briefly describes the results of his ministry in terms of the passage from Isaiah 61, which he read out at the start of his ministry in Nazareth. He concludes with the cryptic statement, "And blessed is anyone who takes no offence at me." We are not told what John made of this response, but Jesus goes on to explain who John was and what his role was in the unfolding drama of God's purposes. John was the promised messenger sent ahead of the return of God, and as a consequence, there was no human being born who was greater than he, making him equal to or even surpassing Moses. But because John's ministry signaled the turn of the age, the arrival of the coming one and the kingdom of God, his greatness is capped. Anyone who belongs to the new age, who is in the kingdom of God, is greater by default. The point is not to criticize John or to artificially exalt anybody's worth, but to contrast the two ages. This new one which is dawning is infinitely greater than all that preceded it. John's unsurpassed honour was to be the one who heralded this transition. Also worth noting in this story, which is paralleled in Matthew 11, is that Luke adds the note in verse 29 that the tax collectors acknowledged God's justice, as opposed to the Pharisees and scribes. In describing John's ministry, Jesus compares his as well, but makes the point that whereas John's had the character of warning and austerity, his was joyful and celebratory. But Jesus' real point is that whether the message was that of gloom or bliss, both he and John have been ignored. This generation will not respond to either message or method. Contrasting this generation's unresponsiveness is the penitent woman in the next scene, which is a banquet thrown by a Pharisee. Only Luke mentions that Jesus dines with Pharisees. It is a wonderful and dramatic scene with condemnation and vindication. Jesus knows what is in his host's mind, and Luke has shown him before being able to know thoughts. This harks back to Simeon's prophecy about hearts being laid bare. Like Nathan with David, he tells Simon his host a short parable to gain his opinion before trapping him with it. It is worth noting the emphasis on sins and forgiveness. Tax collectors and sinners had not been simply dining with Jesus and having a jolly good time. They had come to be forgiven. Despite the celebratory nature of his ministry, Jesus was not an easy-going party animal. He told the truth, pure, undiluted, sometimes devastating truth. We will see another example of this with Zacchaeus. This woman's attitudes and actions, because her sins were many, was absolutely the correct approach to Jesus at this moment, and her faith saved her. That Jesus thinks people should approach him weeping and begging for forgiveness is an incredible indication of who he thinks he is and what he has come to do. It is no wonder that the people present ask, "Who is this who forgives sins?"